والله يمسيكم بالخير لك وين رجال الدحية. يلا 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 عليكم. وانا دمي فلسطيني رافع بالعالي جبيني، و4-4 2 والهم شو قاوية، واللي احنا شعب الجبارين ما بنذل وما بنلين، وعاشت فلسطين والقدس عربية.
3,000 years ago in ancient Jerusalem, the young King Solomon was forced to put his wisdom to the ultimate test.
And the king said, "Bring me a sword." And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other."
According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon would become one of ancient's mightiest kings, gifted with powers beyond those of mortal men. Why then does this legendary king have such harsh critics? Solomon is considered by many to be his most enigmatic ruler. How did his duel of wits with the Queen of Sheba spark one of the great love affairs in the Bible? How could a king blessed with divine wisdom be ultimately responsible for the destruction of his own kingdom? 3,000 years ago, the Bible tells us, the wisest of all men ruled. The monarch's name was Solomon. The source of his wisdom was said to be divine. He could see into the human heart, and it was said even understand the language of the beasts. According to tradition, this legendary king kept a harem of 1,000 women. The walls of his holy temple were said to be lined with the purest gold. But today, King Solomon's fabled kingdom has crumbled to dust. His very existence has been called into question. The roots of Solomon's legend can be traced back to a pivotal moment in time, to the days when Solomon's father, the warrior King David, lay dying in his palace. David's 17 sons gather at the royal court, all claimants to the throne. Among them is a mere boy, according to Jewish legend, barely 12 years old. His name is Solomon. It is now, as David lies near death, that Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, approaches the frail king's bedside.
And she said unto him, "My lord, you swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, Your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and shall sit on my throne."
Even though Solomon is not first in line to inherit the throne, David accedes to Bathsheba's wishes. Too sick to rule, David proclaims Solomon king. But many are left wondering, does this youth have the knowledge, let alone the vision, to rule the people? Taking advantage of this period of grief and uncertainty, one of Solomon's half-brothers attempts to overthrow the young monarch. Solomon quells the rebellion and condemns his half-brother to death. It is soon afterwards that Solomon journeys to a hilltop named Gibeon, a sanctuary just outside of Jerusalem. Here he dutifully offers a sacrifice to God, never imagining that he is about to experience the defining moment of his life. That night, God appears before Solomon in a dream.
And God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." And Solomon said unto God, I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. Give therefore to me, thy servant, an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad.
Many biblical scholars suspect that the story of Solomon very modestly asking God for wisdom and nothing else is a rather fanciful piece of propaganda written by the court of Solomon to support his being the king.
After this moment, Solomon would claim that his power stemmed from his special relationship with God. It was not unusual for a king to govern by such divine authority, making it very difficult for anyone to oppose his rule. Before long, the young king's wisdom would be put to the test in a baffling legal case. When approached by two women, each claiming the same baby as her own, Solomon is asked to discern the identity of the real mother. Their voices rise to a fever pitch, each claiming the baby as her own.
And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the child in two, and give half to the one, half to the other.
Suddenly, one of the women lunges forward, crying out for him to stop. She begs Solomon to give the baby to the other woman and spare the child's life.
Then the king responded, Give the first woman the living boy.
It's a wonderful story, but once again, seems like it must have been hatched in the campaign headquarters of Solomon becoming the king, just as much as it could come from an actual decision.
With his wisdom now legendary, Solomon takes up the reins of leadership with commanding authority.
One of the ways that you sealed relationships with foreign countries is through marriage. So early on, Solomon's number of marriages must have been seen as, look at the great statesman-like accomplishments of this great diplomatic king of ours.
The Bible tells us that Solomon accumulates 700 wives and 300 concubines. Many have asked, are these astonishing numbers an exaggeration?
He probably didn't marry all those women any more than he had all those mountains of gold. There's no doubt whatsoever that the Bible magnifies the accomplishments of some of their royal figures, even at the same time that it criticizes them.
Criticism of Solomon's many affairs is also implicit in biblical accounts, as is his habit of building chapels for his foreign wives, so they can continue to worship their own pagan god. Raising even more questions about Solomon's personal values is the fact that despite his large number of wives, Solomon's offspring are barely mentioned.
This is a man who supposedly had a harem consisting of 1,000 women. Where are all the kids? Where's all the little pitter-patter of thousands of feet around the palace?
Seemingly unaware of his own disturbing flaws, Solomon embarks on an ambitious building program. Outside of the Hebrew Bible, however, there is little historical evidence that Solomon ever existed, which makes the quest for archaeological clues all the more crucial. Could it be that these ancient stones of Megiddo corroborate the story told in the Old Testament of Solomon's flourishing kingdom?
Was Solomon a real figure? Those questions are very difficult to answer. I think, on the basis of what I know about the archaeological remains of the period, if we didn't have Solomon, we'd have to invent somebody and we could name him Solomon.
According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon builds fortifications throughout Israel, where he can provision his armies and guard strategic trade routes. But it is in the glittering capital city of Jerusalem where he embarks on his most ambitious project, an extravagant palace that contains within it the Holy Temple. But what remains of Solomon's grand legacy in our own time? To this day, beneath the age-old streets of Jerusalem, not one shred of evidence has been unearthed. to support the existence of either Solomon's palace or temple.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Montreal Arabic Corner. This is our 67th episode devoted to the mysteries of King Solomon. He was, according to the Old Testament and the Quran, a fabulous, wealthy and wise king. He became a king at the age of 12, and the Torah credits him as the builder of the first temple in Jerusalem when he was 16 years old. Was he, or just a myth about him? He was the second-born child of David and his wife Bathsheba, widow of Uriah the Hittite, a Canaanite tribe. As his father David, he married Canaanite women and others as well. According to the biblical account, he married 700 women and 300 concubines. His wives were described as foreign princesses, including a pharaoh's daughter, whom he spent lavishly on her, building a royal, fabulous palace in Jerusalem. He married also women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and the Hittites. The only wife mentioned by name is Naamah, the Ammonites, mother of Solomon's successor, Rehoboam. The biblical narrative notes with disapproval that Solomon permitted his foreign wives to import their national deities, building temples to Ishtar and Milcom. But the most lasting love affair of his last days was with the Queen of Sheba. It was because of his sins in marrying so many foreign wives, according to the Bible, of course, that the Lord punished him by removing 10 of the 12 tribes of the Israelites. Islam is the prophets of Allah, God, bestowed upon with many God-given gifts, including the ability to speak to animals and rule jinnis. Muslims further maintain that he remained faithful to a one and only one God, Allah. He reigned justly over a vast kingdom, was blessed with kingship, which was given to him by God. However, historical evidence of King Solomon and other than accounts has been so minimal and unimportant as to be not worth considering. Scholars describe the period of his reign as a dark age in ancient Palestine, even considering the citing in his biblical court records that gave a specific year during which King Hiram I of Tyre sent materials to Solomon for the constructions of the temple. But there are no archaeological material evidence. Excavation at Hazor, Megiddo, Beit Sheam, and Gezer uncovered structures that he and others have argued date from Solomon's reign, but others such as Israel Finkelstein's Neil Silberman argue that they should be dated to the Umayyad periods, more than a century after Solomon. Scholars and archaeologists confirm that they could not find no substantial archaeological evidence that support the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon, saying that the earliest record of the trans-Arabian caravans voyages from Teman and Sheba into the Middle Euphrates occurred in the mid-8th century BC. Solomon's reign derived from biblical chronology are from 970 to 1931 BC. Can be checked against datable Babylonian, Assyrian, and Egyptian records at a few points, and these correspondence have allowed archaeologists to date its kings in a modern framework. Accordingly, there are no mention of King Solomon to correspond to these records. The death of Solomon and the division of his kingdom would have occurred in the spring of 1931 BC. If you believe in religious books, Solomon was a king and a prophet. If you believe in science and archaeology, there is no Solomon and no evidence found to justify the existence of this mythical character. Réfléchis. Thank you. Time has changed.